To the November 2019 Wildlife and Fisheries Commission meeting. Glad that everyone's here today. I wanted to just let you guys know if anyone has any comments that they would like to make, to please fill out a card and bring it to Secretary Falcon so we can go ahead and do it. If you can, keep your comments to 3 minutes and be respectful of everyone. With that, I'd like to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Smitko, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Falcon, would you please do a roll call? Here. Here. Here.
Jerry Smitko.
here.
We have 6 tenants and we have 4
Thank you very much. I'd like to have someone adopt the agenda for today. Oh, excuse me. Would someone adopt the minutes? Commissioner Corville made the motion and Commissioner McPherson made the second. Anything? With that, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Approval of the agenda for today. Commissioner Samini,
Second.
Commissioner Guidry, second. I was looking that way. With that, anything to say? Nothing. All in favor say aye. Thank you. Special announcements for today. Personal privilege. Any commissioners have anything they'd like to say today? I have something. I just wanted a reminder for next month's meeting. We're going to be having it in Lafayette at the Wildlife and Fisheries office there. It'll start at 1 p.m. And with that, we'll have a good afternoon after hunting. And the following, it will be back here. And with that, Mr. Secretary, do you have anything you'd like to say today?
Mr. Chairman, we're going to also provide lunch for the commission in Lafayette, okay?
Thank you very much. Anything else? With that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the enforcement report. Major Skinner.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. For the month of October, we had 9 boating incidents, 3 injuries, and 2 fatalities, 1,010 written citations, 431 written warnings, and 25 public assists. Here's a brief synopsis of a few cases that were made last month. 4 Gretna men were cited in Plaquemine Parish for possessing fish without a basic fishing license or saltwater license, possessing undersized black drum, over the limit of black drum, possessing undersized red drum, and taking female crabs during a closed season. 2 of the 4 men were arrested and booked into the Bell Chase lockup for multiple prior recreational fishing violations. Agents received an anonymous tip that the 4 men were over their limit of black drum near Lake Hermitage. Agents found a vehicle that matched the description from the tip, pulled it over in Bell Chase, and found the illegal fish and crabs. The 4 men may also face civil restitution for the replacement value of the illegally taken fish and crabs. A joint investigation between the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration resulted in 2 commercial fishermen being cited in Cameron Parish for crabbing violations. Enforcement agents and NOAA officers were conducting patrols on Sabine Lake to gather information on illegal crabbing activities when they cited 1 subject for taking undersized crabs. 1 crate of crabs was seized and returned to the water. Another subject was found to be in possession of 211 female crabs during the female crab closure with the intent to sell the illegal crabs in Texas. The subject was charged with a federal Lacey Act violation. Enforcement agents arrested a LaSalle Parish man for deer hunting violations in LaSalle and Catahoula parishes during the 2018-2019 deer season, which included taking over the season limit of deer, possession of illegally taken deer, failing to comply with deer tagging requirements, using another person's deer tags, and failure to validate deer. Agents received information that the subject harvested over his season limit of deer and began an investigation, which included securing search warrants for properties owned by the subject. During questioning by LDWF agents and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agents, the subject admitted to killing 16 deer during the 2018-2019 deer season in Catahoula and LaSalle parishes, and to using tags belonging to others to tag the illegal deer. In addition to the criminal fines and possible incarceration, the subject may also face civil restitution totaling $16,246 for the replacement value of the illegally killed deer. This concludes the enforcement report, sir.
Thank you very much, Major Skinner. Commissioner McPherson?
Major, I don't know if you'd be the one to answer this, or the secretary or the colonel, but do we, this is a two-part question. Do we monitor the disposition of these cases in the judiciary? How many are prosecuted and what the ultimate disposition is?
The region captains generally stay on top of that because they have a pretty good working relationship with the local district attorney's offices. But as far as a list of what's prosecuted and what is not, there's not an official list kept.
Mr. Secretary, could we at least look at that and see if that's something we could do to track these? I remember at one time, the Louisiana Wildlife Federation recognized that there was slap on the wrist, that there was gnaw processing, that they just wasn't going to lose a vote over a hunting violation or a fishing violation. And they started tracking it, and it was real good results. These DAs and all, when they saw they had a scorecard, they really started paying attention. And I'd like to know what our ability to do would be that. The other thing we've talked about, civil restitution and how we had taken that back over internally. I'd like to see a report on what we're accomplishing with that, whether we're on track, whether we're able to do that successfully, and how much we're collecting and how much we're not collecting would be just as important with that as part of the information that we receive as a commission.
Commissioner McPherson, if I could briefly, to your point on the civil restitution, since we have brought it in-house instead of relying on the district attorneys to collect it on our behalf, I think you'll gladly provide that report. I think you'll be very pleased to see what we're collecting as opposed to what we were prior to that. And I think that it's important that we do make sure that the district attorneys do their job and prosecute these cases, but bringing that in-house has given us the power to make sure, at least from the civil restitution side, we are able to collect those. So I appreciate your points on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Samini?
Yeah, one small question, Major. It's my understanding y'all doing a new drive for cadets. How's that going?
I'm sorry,
Are we
sir.
doing a new drive for cadets for this upcoming academy? How's that going?
It just, the position or the announcement just went out on the 4th, which was Monday.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very early. Probably within the next 10 to 15 days, we'll probably start seeing applications come in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Major Skinner. Moving on, we're going to go on to number 8, agenda item, to receive and consider a resolution to add properties through acquisition, donation, Marpar Swamp Wildlife Management Area. Alvin Landry.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Mr. Secretary. My name is Alvin Landry, and I'm an attorney for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. I have today a proposed resolution which will add land to one of our WMAs. I'm here to present and request the adoption of a resolution adding and incorporating property into the Maurepas Swamp Wildlife Management Area. This resolution is to confirm the third and final addition of 3 sets of tracks, Live Land, Land Canal 53, and Purvis, which were donated by Resource Environmental Solutions to the department, totaling 1,475 acres, including the water bottoms, and are located adjacent to the boundaries of Maurepas Swamp WMA, and to be added to the same. So this is the map showing the tracks to be added. The tracks are being incorporated into the Maurepas Swamp WMA and will now be indexed into the State Land Office. The management costs for the donations were estimated to be around $300,000 for the department to meet its conservation obligations on these properties. And RES has agreed to provide that funding in addition to the donated properties themselves. So with the addition of these acres, the Maurepas Swamp the WMA will be almost 120,000 acres of wetland habitat located in Ascension, St. John the Baptist, and Livingston parishes. And I ask for favorable consideration of this resolution with attachments.
Thank you, Alvin. Any questions? Commissioner Corville?
Mr. Chairman, before I move favorably, and Ms. Landry, I think you just hit on it. You said that RES is going to give the department 300 grand to manage, and that's the obligations that are included in the permittee responsible mitigation part of this, or does RES still retain the obligation of the performance? I'm assuming y'all did tree planting, or they did tree planting here. So they maintain the responsibility that those trees meet the criteria that the Corps sets out. That burden doesn't fall on the department, but they're giving you guys 300 grand just to manage the easement that's on it. Did I understand that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So when appropriate, I'd like to move favorably.
Any other questions? Hearing none, Commissioner Corville? Want to move? Commissioner Corville moves favorably, second by Commissioner Samini. Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimously voted upon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Landry. We're going to move on to number 9 on the agenda. To receive and consider a resolution to establish Queen Bess as a refuge through the lease agreement with Division of Administration, Office of State Lands. Mr. Todd Baker.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. You should have, well, the resolution is in front of you to potentially take Queen Bess Island and turn it into our newest wildlife refuge. I'm going to give you a presentation, a little overview of the island, some of the history that's gone on and the importance of this island. So this is Queen Bess Island. It's a tiny little thing. It's 37 acres located in Barataria Bay, just north of, about 2.5 miles north of Grand Isle. If you were to go by this island in the wintertime or fall, you really wouldn't recognize anything special about it other than it has a rock ring around it. But in the spring and summertime, that changes quite substantially. This island is the 3rd largest colonial water bird island that we have in Louisiana. Within that 37 acre rock ring is only about 5 acres of suitable nesting habitat left. And on that 5 acres is just under 4,500 nests each year. So when you approach this island in the spring and summer, it literally explodes with birds, primarily brown pelicans are a big nester out here, but a whole host of wading birds as well. And if you look at that, if you break down the number of nests per acre, it's pretty substantial. It's almost 900 nests per acre on this island. And if you really start calculating the birds, that 4,480 is the number of nests. So you can double that for the number of birds that are out there. And then you can double that number yet again whenever the young start to hit the ground. So you can see it's quite a substantial number of birds. And And when you approach the island from a distance in the summertime, you can see them getting up off the island. And I promise you, from miles away, you can smell it if you're downwind. This island is also the 4th largest brown pelican colony in Louisiana. It provides between 15 and 20% of the nesting population each year. I gave a presentation to this commission back in October where we commemorated the 50-year anniversary of restocking brown pelicans to Louisiana. And Queen Bess was the island where that first started. Between 1968 and 1976, they relocated about 700 birds from Florida to Queen Bess Island to reestablish brown pelicans in the Pelican State. Unfortunately, Queen Bess is the last remaining brown pelican colony in Barataria Bay. In 2010, there were 5 colonies. Due to erosion and subsidence, we're now down to one last remaining island, and that is the one we're talking about today. And then finally, I'm going to touch, it's also home to 5 species of birds that are considered of greatest conservation need in Louisiana, is laid out by our Wildlife Action Plan. So it's not just important for brown pelicans, but for 4 other species of birds that are in decline in the state. And I'll go through some of the restoration efforts that we've had on this island over the years. There's been a lot of attention. So this is some photographs. I'm going to throw up a few photographs of the island from the summer of 2018. It's really just past peak nesting season. And really all you can see in these photographs are brown pelicans, but there's a lot more going on than just the brown pelicans. There's egrets, terns, ibis, and other species out there as well. But you can see what's left of the island is literally covered in birds. Just a young pelican there. This is perhaps one of my favorite photographs. If you look closely, every black mangrove bush out there has at least one nest in it. Every available piece of real estate that these birds need to nest is used. And in that bottom right-hand corner, that's actually 3 nests in one bush. This is one of the places where you can go out and you can literally see brown pelicans nesting in the top of a bush. You can see night herons in the middle of the same bush, and then underneath it may be laughing gulls. So you literally have birds nesting on top of birds on this island. As I mentioned earlier, this is some photographs from the October presentation that I gave the commission showing the restocking effort, where our biologists teamed up with biologists in Florida, went out there and captured young of the year birds from Florida colonies, brought them back to Louisiana, released them on Queen Bess, fed them for a few weeks in hopes that they would fledge and imprint on that island and come back and nest. And by 1971, we had our first successful nest of brown pelicans back in Louisiana, and it was on this island, Queen Bess. Quickly, I'm going to go through some of the previous restoration efforts on this island. Because of its significance to brown pelicans, DNR back in 1990-93 teamed up with the Corps to do 2 phases of a single project. One phase was to take, I'm going to use this pointer. Here we go. This was the existing island at the time, and they took rocks and they outlined the existing island to protect it from erosion. And then they came in and added a second cell, which we'll call cell 2 in this area. And they plumped approximately 152,000 acres of dredge material from the nearby Barataria waterway into cell 2 to create additional nesting habitat, and also for the convenience of dredging out the waterway as well. And then in 1998, QIPRA did a very similar project, and they added on a 3rd cell, which we'll call cell 3, and they pulled additional material out of the Barataria waterway to build sediment, or to build land in cell 3. Unfortunately, this 1998 project, the sediment that they used was very poor, and it never really created any substantial land. That cell 3 always stayed kind of an open lagoon. So that's some of the restoration efforts in the 90s. We're just going to move chronologically to 2010. So the next significant event in coastal Louisiana and on this island was the BP oil spill. Unfortunately, Queen Bess Island was in the crosshairs of that oil spill. It was oiled multiple times throughout May and June of the oil spill, and also it was during the peak of nesting season. So a lot of the birds on the island were also oiled. We don't have an exact number. We don't know how many birds exactly were oiled on this, but we estimated it was over 1,000 birds on this island alone were oiled. So we're going to move up to today. If you were to go out to the island right now, you'd see an awful lot of activity. The state, and when I say the state, Wildlife and Fisheries has partnered with CPRA to use some of the Deepwater Horizon NERDA funds to restore the island. And I want at this time, I want to point out Miss Katie Freer. She's here with us today. She's a project manager with CPRA. She's really the brains behind this project and really has it moving. But it's a $10 million project, and the goal of the project is to restore 36 acres of the island to nesting habitat. And the contractor we have on the project is Ponch and Trading Partners. So I'll show you. We'll go into a little bit here. This is kind of a busy slide. I'm going to point to the screen in the behind you. But this is Grand Isle at the bottom left, so you can see the kind of the proximity of Queen Bess to Grand Isle. It's pretty close. Essentially, what this project is doing, it's going to take sand from the Mississippi River and fill in this island. We're going to take all this open water area and convert it to nesting habitat. We're also going to take about 7 acres of this cell 3, and we're going to put limestone on it to create a easily maintained bare ground area for nesting terns and skimmers. That'll be something that the department can maintain well into the future. It's easier to spray limestone and keep it bare than it is to go out and spray sand over and over. Also, the project entails elevating this rock ring that circles the island and installing some segmented breakwaters on the southern part of the island. Now, these segmented breakwaters are rather unique. Generally in Louisiana, when we build segmented breakwaters, it's to provide erosion protection for the land behind it. But this island already has a rock ring around it. The purpose of these segmented breakwaters is to create a lagoon type feature adjacent to the island. Since we're filling in the entire island, there will be no lagoon area left. And so the purpose of this low energy lagoon type feature is to allow those birds, as they're fledging, coming off the nest, to have a slack water, low energy area in which they can feed, preen, learn how to swim and fly. Regardless of the wind direction, they'll have that lagoon type feature to them. And then those little yellow dots are, for lack of a better term, we call them bird ramps, but that's 250-pound riprap all around the island. We're going to come in a few areas and take crushed limestone, fill in all those voids so those small birds can come and go from the island a little easier. So this project was a challenge from day one. I'm sure Katie will vouch for that. When we first started looking at sediment sources and how we're going to build the island, it became very apparent that a 37-acre island was not going to be very attractive to a large dredging company with a large dredge. It's simply too small. However, there are no suitable sediment sources anywhere around this island, so it's too far removed from good sediment for a small hydraulic dredge company to potentially be interested in a project like this. So we had to think out of the box and figure out how we're going to restore this island. And the technique that was brought up was to actually barge in sediment from the Mississippi River, from a borrow pit on the river, re-slurry it, and put it back on the island. So this is kind of a busy slide, but in the background, that's the barge bringing the sand in. So tug and barge is bringing this in. This excavator, which the claw is hanging over the top, is picking sand up out of this barge, placing it in this slurry or wet box, and pumping it through this pipe and onto the island. And I've seen quite a few dredge projects, but this one is quite impressive. As that sand is falling out of this pipe, it's stacking up almost immediately. There's an excavator full time sitting there pushing that land out and digging a canal to train that sediment where we want it to go. So the sand quality that we have is very nice, and it's building land very quickly. And this is kind of a drone shot of that operation. You can see this tug and barge bringing in the sand. This is the barge with the crane that's pulling it, putting it in this wet box, and then it's coming through this pipe and filling in. And a little better illustration. This is an aerial mosaic that was shot on October 21st. So in less than, the contractor started September 15th, actually moving sediment. And in 1 month, he's already filled into the low depression area in cell 1. We were out there yesterday, and he's actually filled in a good portion of cell 3, most of cell 2, and he's working his way back to this depression area. So that contractor's doing very well. There's a few hiccups getting started, but they're really rolling now. The project's progressing very nicely. And this is a photograph that was provided as well. You can see those segmented breakwaters going in, and you can see those little dots. That's actually the birds already taken to that slack water area. You can see the wave energy out here, which isn't great, but you can see how much it's reducing that effect. So hopefully that'll be very attractive to young of the year birds as well. One thing I'll point out about this project, it's kind of, the timing on it's very critical. We couldn't let them go in during nesting season and do it, so the contractor had to be ready and on the go for September 15th when nesting season ended. So they jumped on the island, and they have to be off by February 15th as well. So they're working against a very compressed timeline to get this done. So at the end of the day, this is state land. So what is the purpose of making this into a wildlife refuge? It's certainly not in any danger of development. But we brought this before you for really a couple purposes, which are on the screen, and I'll go into them. I've never been a fan of reading my own slides, so I tend not to do that. But basically, if somebody wanted to go out onto Queen Bess Island today or during nesting season and walk around, they could do it. There's no law or regulation that they're breaking. The only thing that's brought into question is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and our agents would literally have to catch somebody breaking an egg, attempting to kill a bird in order to make that violation. In the meantime, they're harassing birds by the thousands, jumping off the island, exposing eggs, exposing young to the heat of the day, and causing a lot of mortality out there. If we were to bring this in as a wildlife refuge, we could promulgate rules and regulations on this island. One that I think we would recommend to the commission very quickly is that during nesting season, we would not allow the public on this island, to give those birds, those species of conservation concern, and others that nest out there just that time they need to be not harassed. The second point, the reason to bring us in as a wildlife refuge, just to really kind of show that the department is serious about protecting some of these sensitive coastal habitats. I told you earlier that we're down to our last remaining brown pelican colony in Barataria Bay, and that trend's happening all over the state. Since 2010, we've lost 54% of our brown pelican colonies in Louisiana, and we see no reason why that trend isn't going to continue that direction. So we're losing a lot of habitat very quickly. By designating this as a wildlife refuge, it certainly makes it attractive for the department and other agencies that would seek future restoration on this island as well. So just designating it as a wildlife refuge elevates it in priority to a lot of funding sources that we could potentially seek in the future. And third, it's not on the screen. I've given you a history of the island. The state has invested a lot of money in this island and a lot of time in this island. And when you talk about the story of brown pelicans in Louisiana, in my opinion, you can't write that book without having a chapter or two on Queen Bess Island, just because of its historical significance to the state and to the bird. So just another thought of a potential reason to consider including it. However, anytime we roll properties into our portfolio, they come with a cost. Fortunately for Queen Bess, we have funding for at least 10 years to address some of that. Part of the BA 202 project, or the ongoing restoration project on the island, has set aside about $3.3 million for O&M funds to maintain the island to the future. If we need rocks, if we need additional sign, if the vegetative plantings fail, we have that $3.3 million we'll work with CPRA to get those things done, but that money is earmarked for this island for operation and maintenance of the island. Part of the funding source that we're using to restore the island obligates us to monitor success for the next 10 years as well. And there's currently $1.6 million set aside for the department to use to monitor nesting success. So whether it's a refuge or not, we're going to be obligated to go out there and monitor what's happening on the island, both from a vegetative planting success and from a bird usage and nesting success. So there is funds out there for O&M and for future monitoring of this island. And that's all I have. I'll take any questions you may have. This is just a couple of photographs of some banding projects we did out on the island this year.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the commission? Commissioner McPherson?
It's a tremendous project, and I want to compliment the department on this. Just for my edification, can you go back to those other slides? It's got some other islands in the background and identify those for us.
Oh,
That one right there, is that the state park?
no, sir. That is looking north. I'm going to probably screw this up, but I think that is Philo Bryce Island. So you're looking to the north.
Go back further. I think you have.
You got one that's got two islands in
There you
it.
go.
Yeah, there you go. It's got the name on there.
Go back another slide, maybe there was,
The opening slide.
no. see, there's 2 islands in that picture. And the reason I'm asking you is what are those islands? And why don't we have the same interest in them? And why don't the birds use those islands?
That is a great question. If I could answer why some birds don't nest on some islands out there, I wouldn't be in this position. But we know that brown pelicans, they have a certain sensitivity for certain habitats. And one thing that some of our predecessors that put out a research paper that basically showed they prefer islands that are less than 50 acres in size. They also prefer islands that are a foot above marsh elevation at least. Those to the north of it, I believe, are all marsh elevation. There is a portion of one of them that is elevated because I think it's adjacent to the Barataria waterway. So where they've dredged in the past, they've elevated it. But they're just really specific, and they imprint a lot of times on the island in which they were born. So they won't necessarily spread out. They come right, which is why the project to reintroduce brown pelicans to Louisiana was so successful. They brought them from Florida before they could fly, put them on an island, fed them for a couple of weeks, hoping they would imprint on Queen Bess, and sure enough, they did.
But see, you kind of begging my question, and the reason I'm taking this time is it's kind of concerning to understand that we're down to one nesting area for brown pelicans, with what it took to reintroduce them and all. But I assume if you can carry them from Florida to Queen Bess Island, you could probably take fledglings and take them from one island to another island and maybe have the same success if the habitat was right. But just something to look at from our biologist standpoint.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't really see a distinction, and it may be that elevation, but those look very similar to me.
So we've done that. At best, we've tried to relocate birds. I'm going to screw the numbers up, the percentages I have right. 50% of the time it works, 50% of the time it fails. So we've done it. Most recently, we took birds from Raccoon Island, moved them over to Whiskey Island, which is right next door, and they never took. We did that for 4 years, relocating birds, and they never took. The birds are picky, and they see something that we don't always see. We do know that elevation and vegetation and size of the island is important, but it's also important to be so many miles away from the mainland as well. You would think, and I would think as well, if you go out there right now and look at the 2 islands, there's not a whole lot of difference. Other than that one to the north, I believe, is a little more tidally inundated, and where those birds are really focusing their nesting on Queen Bess is on the highest portion of the island. And unfortunately, in coastal Louisiana, we're not getting much elevation. We're just losing it. So it's in large, we're just losing a lot of that suitable nesting habitat. But you're right. I'm sure we need to figure it out, and then we can probably do some more relocation efforts.
If you could make the
It's an
suitable
investment.
elevation on Queen Bess, I assume the same technology can make the suitable elevation on the other islands.
That's correct. But what we're trying to do with this project specifically, and the reason why we chose Queen Bess to do it, is to rehabilitate islands.
I'm not taking it, this
Yes,
is a wonderful
Yes, sir.
project. I'm just trying
Yes,
to
sir.
understand the future of.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Samony?
This is not really a question, and I don't want you to answer it. It's just an observation that I have. It seems that when CPRA sees the need in an emergency to make land, they hire suction dredgers to save the birds. But when we're losing all our estuaries, they want to make diversions, and it takes 100 years just to see if it works. That's one of these things that kind of baffles me. It seems like that they're more interested in the birds, which is a wonderful project, and the horticulture and commercial industries down on the bayous. Just a statement I needed to make, get it off my chest. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Here are no more questions. I'd like to see this move favorably. Commissioner Guidry moves this favorably, second by Commissioner McPherson. Hearing no objections, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item number 10, to announce the winning artist for the 2020, excuse me, going back in time, duck stamp. Do you have a copy of those pictures from 2010, Larry? I'm sorry.
I bet I can find them. I think a lot of us would like to go back to
Mr.
2010.
Reynolds, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission.
Before we start, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to take time to recognize students from the Louisiana State University School of Natural Renewable Resources. Dr. Luke Laborde's class is here in attendance. My understanding, this is a senior level human dimension class. They're here to learn about the process of how we go about establishing rules and regulations. And they came basically to hear Larry's discussion on the duck stamp, and just kidding. But I just wanted to recognize them. Dr. Laborde does a wonderful job of training the next generation of resource professionals, and we're glad to have them here. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you very much, Randy. I failed to ask Doc earlier what he was doing here. But we're happy to have y'all here. I'm glad that y'all are here.
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure. Don't let me disappoint y'all. But 2 weeks ago, the department held the 32nd annual Louisiana State Duck Stamp Competition in this very room. The winning design will be used for the 2020 State Duck Stamp. And I hope you'll have the time, if you haven't already, to take a look at the top 3 finishers at the back of the room. Over $14 million has been generated from the duck stamp program for wetland conservation since 1989, with $305,000 raised last year from the sale of duck licenses and duck stamps. I make the distinction between duck licenses and stamps because in 2010 they were legally decoupled, and the stamp is no longer required to hunt waterfowl in our state. Thus, the Louisiana State Duck Stamp is now a collector's item or a conservation purchase. There are a surprising number of people that call me that want to contribute to wetland conservation in the state of Louisiana. I tell them to buy Louisiana State Duck Stamps. It goes directly for that purpose. The bulk of the funding from this program comes from duck licenses, however, and duck license sales declined another 15% from the previous year, but stamp sales increased. Still, only $12,400 of the $305,000 generated last year comes from the sale of duck stamps, and a quarter of that comes from the winning artist, who agrees to provide a resident and non-resident duck stamp with every print that he sells. Consequently, that makes it even more important to find the highest quality artwork to produce a desirable stamp for the collector's market. And our contest, for whatever reason, continues to be an effective mechanism for generating artwork that produces outstanding stamps. This year we had 21 entries. That's up 50% from last year. I guess ringnecks are more popular with artists than shovelers. 7 from Louisiana, 2 from Texas and Indiana, and 1 each from Arkansas, Georgia, Oklahoma, Wyoming, South Dakota, Mississippi, Delaware, Washington, Florida, and Ohio. So like every year, our contest has a truly national flavor. The focal species was the ringneck duck, a small to medium-sized diving duck, often called ringbills or blackjacks, which, contrary to other species, are wintering in increasing numbers across our coastal fresh marshes, Catahoula Lake, swamps, and reservoirs in North Louisiana. The entrants this year included 2 past federal duck stamp contest winners and 7 past Louisiana duck stamp winners. So the quality of the artwork was really outstanding. A panel of 5 judges is selected by the department to give our contest credibility in both artistic method and waterfowl realism. The judges for this year's contest were Mr. James Harris, retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist and longtime habitat manager at Delta National Wildlife Refuge at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Mr. Fred Rutger, retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pilot biologist, well known for decades of flying aerial waterfowl surveys across North America and beyond. Mr. Randy Caminita, a renowned professional wildlife artist from Folsom, Louisiana, who is a past competitor in our contest. Randy's become a great friend of the duck stamp program and has now judged 4 contests. Mr. John Robinette, a retired wildlife biologist and regional manager for LDWF, who's also a wildlife artist and whose work graces the walls of this building on a number of floors. And lastly, Mrs. Courtney Lichtenstein, who is a curator of a large waterfowl collection in Houma and a team member of the chairman of Ducks Unlimited this year. The contest is open to the public and a number of artists attend, I think mostly to chew on the judges after the contest is over. In 2 rounds, the top 3 finishers and then a winner is selected. And I asked them if they'll allow me to keep their artwork, the top 3 finishers, until Thanksgiving to display for anyone to see. So this year, in 3rd place was Anthony Paget of Noblesville, Indiana. Anthony won our contest in 2009 with a Chesapeake Bay Retriever during our Retriever Saves Game series. In 2nd place was Jeffrey Kleinfelter of Etna Green, Indiana. Jeffrey won our contest in 2004, 2008, and 2012, and he also did the tribute piece to Robert Helm that hangs on the wall over here. Jeffrey has been a great friend of the Duck Stamp program. But the winner this year of the 2020 Louisiana State Duck Stamp Contest is Adam Grimm of Wallace, South Dakota. This was the first time that Mr. Grimm has entered our competition, but he won the Federal Duck Stamp Contest in 1999 with model ducks at the age of 21, the youngest Federal Duck Stamp Contest winner ever. And then he won again in 2013 with canvasbacks. He's much acclaimed as a waterfowl artist and was one of the artists featured in the $1 Million Duck documentary about the Federal Duck Stamp program. The department continues to greatly appreciate all of the artists for their participation. All they really get from our contest is being the Louisiana State Duck Stamp Contest winner. There's no prize money, but there's also no royalties owed to the department. And so for a great businessman as an artist, it's an excellent opportunity. We continue to attract great talent, and the department greatly appreciates it. I hope you'll take a couple of minutes, if you haven't already, and take a look at those paintings. They are truly outstanding. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, those portraits are absolutely stunning.
It's amazing.
My wife's an artist, and I've seen the pains that are taken in doing something like that. And it's truly a talent to get something to look like a photograph. They're absolutely beautiful. Any other comments from anyone? Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 11, to receive an update on the recreational red snapper season. Mr. Adrians.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, I have a very brief update on the red snapper season. And the information I'm about to show you has been updated on our website, or should be shortly after the meeting. So we are, as you may know, we had that October opening for weekends only, and we just recently extended that until further notice. And it's currently open weekends only. And we're still hanging. We had no landings in the last weekend that came in, which was through the 27th. Or the 2 weekends ago. This current weekend that we just went through, we don't have those landings yet. We'll have them next week. But we're hanging tight at 95%. There's been about 779,000 pounds harvested to date. And through last weekend, we did have 66 days that we've been open this year. This is just that graphic, shows you how close we are, that we have about 37,000 pounds remaining. However, this time of year with weather and effort being lower, that could be gone in one weekend, could go another few weekends. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Looks like we might have another bad weekend this weekend like last. So it could extend even farther. So thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 12, to receive a summary presentation on the October 2019 Gulf of Mexico Fisheries Management Council meeting. Mr. Shibley.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and commissioners. So the fifth Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council meeting took place October 21st through the 24th in Galveston, Texas. First action was a final action. We looked at, we considered modifying the federal for hire multi-day trip limit possession limits. The council recommends allowing anglers on federal for hire fishing trips that last longer than 30 hours to possess 2 daily bag or vessel limits at any time during those trips. All anglers must have 2 licensed captains on board and possess a receipt showing a departure and arrival time for the trip. Currently, anglers that are on trips exceeding 24 hours in duration are only allowed to possess 2 daily bag limits once 24 hours has elapsed. This action will potentially decrease discards by allowing an increase in flexibility to the charter for hire fleet. Also, this action only affects about 3% of the federal for hire trips across the Gulf that exceed 24 hours. Recreational data calibration. So the Marine Recreational Information Program, MRIP, collects data on recreational harvest. It's undergone substantial modifications from the previous program over the course of the past couple of years. The Gulf states have also developed either supplemental or standalone recreational harvest surveys like the Creel, which are designed to contribute data to stock assessments and monitor catches. NOAA Fisheries is currently conducting stock assessments using the new MRIP data only because the state surveys have not yet been calibrated with the new MRIP survey. The council will explore hosting an in-person workshop to address the MRIP data stream conversions and their calibration with state survey data collection for inclusion in future stock assessments. The council was presented the results from updating the headboat index for lane snapper, as was previously done in CDAR 49. This update to a data limited assessment uses headboat landings to inform lane snapper abundance for the recreational sector. The Council Scientific and Statistical Committee accepted the assessment as the best scientific information available and recommended a new acceptable biological catch of 588,965 pounds. The Council's Refish AP recommended setting the ACL equal to the newly recommended ABC. The new data using the FES adjusted MRIP data are now available, and the Council's SSC will review these data and provide guidance to the Council for the next meeting coming up in January of 2020. Amendment 48 and 5 are the status determination criteria and optimal yield for reef fish and red drum. So the Council must define a maximum sustainable yield, a maximum fishing mortality threshold, a minimum stock size threshold, and an optimal yield for all managed stocks. This is required in the Magnuson-Stevens Act and also under National Standard 1 guidelines. The Council decided to consider the optimal yield for Goliath grouper and red drum separately from the other reef fish to accurately reflect the unique management strategies for those species. So I have underlined there the 30% escapement for red drum is what we historically had red drum managed for, and they maintain that as a preferred option. The Council will review a public hearing draft of this document as January 2020 meeting. Reef Fish Amendment 36B, this is modifying the commercial IFQ programs. The Council reviewed a draft of Reef Fish Amendment 36B considering requiring individual fishing quota shareholder accounts to be associated with a commercial reef fish permit. The AP recommended the Council establish a control date of October 2nd, 2019, which was the date of their meeting, the AP meeting, and then forward that to anyone who buys shares. It would be required to obtain a reef fish permit beyond that date. There's some discussion regarding heritability of shares. So if someone were to pass away and then the shares are passed on to the next of kin, would that person be required to have a reef fish permit or not? At the previous meeting, the Council moved the remaining actions of the amendment into a separate document. Council plans to continue work on this amendment as January meeting, and then we'll also be seeing 36C, which is the separate document of the remaining actions for it. Recreational greater amberjack. So the Council reviewed a draft framework action that considers modifying the recreational management measures for greater amberjack with the goal of allowing recreational harvest in both the spring and fall seasons. The document includes approaches for modifying the bag limit, the fishing year, the season structure, as well as special zone management implementation. So I'll go back to the previous slide, but this is an example of the eastern and western zone split divided between the Mississippi and Alabama border. So the council, after seeing this, directed the staff to create a decision tool that will compare outcomes for zone management using historical recreational landings for 2 and 3 zone alternatives. So if you remember back when we were discussing state management for red snapper, we had very complicated decision tools that incorporated landings, number of trips, and also biomass to help work out our different allocations. And that would be something similar that we're hoping to get for this decision between these east and west zones, and also this third alternative, which is a 3 zone option that essentially is the panhandle of Florida and Alabama in one zone, the rest of Florida in its own zone, and then the western Gulf from Mississippi border west. Most of Louisiana's landings come from August. Our goal here in Louisiana is to ensure that the season is open in August, which would coincide with our snapper season, and would be with the hopes of reducing discards with both seasons being open at the same time. Council will review an updated draft of this document at its next January meeting. CFIRE. So for any of you that didn't know what that acronym stands for, it's pretty long, but anyway, this is the electronic reporting for the Federal for Hire charter fleet. And they have acquired some funding, and it's limited to 1 year, and they need funding for this to continue past the first year. That's the link to the website that explains the requirements, the funding, when things will be implemented, in which stage. Pretty much has all the information needed for the Federal for Hire captains on that link. So this is the projected implementation timeline for CFIRE. Phase 2, which is the most important one, of the location devices being implemented, and that's now projected to be late 2020, when originally it was supposed to be last month on the original plan. The Release Mortality Symposium, this took place outside of Gulf Council and prior to it. The goal is to reduce discard mortality from recreational fishing efforts. Private, charter, and headboat representatives uniformly recommended that anglers should retain flexibility to choose the best release mortality mitigation measure for their circumstances, and asked for the best practice recommendations to guide angler choice. It was recommended that current monitoring programs collecting data relevant to discards and discard mortality should be as consistent as possible for information on discards, including the number, species, mitigation, technique used, condition upon release, and depth of capture. The Gulf Council should also remain as the point agency in control of release mortality. Communications are to continue upon updating research recommendations and messaging. If possible, the Fishing for Our Future website, which is listed on the bottom down there, should be branded as its own organization and enhanced with the addition of narrative content and other media that could be utilized by for influencers. Red Snapper private angler management updates. So the council was asked to have each state have a representative or the council staff member give a summary of this year's red snapper season for 2019. And then also its management activities for next year was recommended by the Coast Guard. So they kind of have a heads up because in each state management plan, states are allowed to change the size limit if they choose, or even the bag limit if they choose. So they want to know ahead of time what each state's going to plan to do for enforcement purposes. Reminder, this is the next council meeting. So we were in New Orleans for the August council meeting. We had Galveston, now we're back to New Orleans for the start of the 2020 year. And I like to always encourage as many of the recreational fishing community as well as the commercial fishing community to attend these meetings, because the public comment bears a lot of weight on decisions made by the council. So if you have some things you'd like that are of concern to you in Louisiana, it would be good if you came and gave some public comment at that meeting. That usually takes place on the Wednesday of the meeting. Any questions, I'd like to entertain them.
Thank you very much, Chris. Any Commissioner Corville?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I just had a couple, Mr. Shibley. My main one is I wanted to thank you for the motions that you made with regard to zones on Amberjack. I thought you did an outstanding job along with the other council members representing Louisiana anglers. So on behalf of us, I'd like to catch Amberjack and don't want to see all of them caught up by Florida. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.
Could you, so right now, I tuned into parts and pieces of it, but so right now, what's being considered is still alternative 2 and 3. Those are both still on the table. Am I correct?
Yeah, it came back. So it was put back on the table after it was moved to consider but rejected during the committee meeting.
Kind of worked up from that one.
Yeah.
But so 2 and 3 are both still alive and moving.
Yeah, and seasonal seasonal allocation is also being considered at the next meeting. So it wasn't in a list at this meeting, but will be added as an alternative for the next one. So that would be like a split, like 70-30 or 60-40 between the spring and fall season. So there's a potential for that.
I guess at some point, we have a December meeting, and I don't know what's on the agenda, but I guess I'm having trouble as a Louisiana angler. If I had to pick which one of those two between 2 and 3 I like the most, I know we don't know the allocation yet, but and I don't want to put you on the spot today, but at some point I'd like to know which direction Louisiana is leaning towards as we look at which one of those is going to be best for our anglers. But
yeah, it's confusing. That's why I asked for the decision tool. I think that'll help because it'll give us a longer time series for landings data than what they had originally. And we may get a clearer picture at that point once we get that.
my main point was to thank you for getting it back in there. That was a little bit dicey at one point in that meeting. Also on release mortality symposium, I tuned into a couple of parts and pieces of that too. And then what you just said about the Coast Guard wanting a feel for where we're going, would it be appropriate? I mean, are they asking us to say what our seasons are going to be structured for that January council meeting? They're asking for that then, because this group will not have taken action.
It's up to you guys when you set the season. So we won't know what that is at that point. I think, some states could provide that, some can't.
I guess what I was even offering or suggesting, we could start potentially have that discussion at the December or January meeting. We don't have to take action, but maybe we could open it up for to give you guys a sense for, maybe we solicit some input from the anglers and see what they're thinking. I don't think anybody can complain about what happened this past year, and it's still happening.
Yeah, we're still fishing.
So if it's appropriate, perhaps the December, January meeting, we don't have to take action, but we could discuss it to give you guys something to go back to those guys with, to give some ballpark framework, especially if the other states are going to be lobbing stuff out there. I don't see why you guys should be handicapped in that same effort. And then on the descending devices, or barotrauma in general, I know what I think. I don't know what the rest of the folks here think, but at some point when we're deciding on our season for next year, we have the option to consider that, whether it's required or recommended or whatever. I still think at some point, and I think Assistant Secretary Banks mentioned that the feds are going to do an outreach effort, but it would be nice at some point to get maybe some examples of some descending devices that we can put on the camera, put on the website, and get people thinking about that. I personally think they might be a pretty good idea based on what I heard in that talk. It'd be nice to sort of, whatever we can do to get the word out of this is what these things look like. Here's how you use them, and here's how they could potentially benefit you as a recreational angler. Whatever we can do or whatever I can do to help further that, I'm volunteering for that, for whatever that's worth. And with that, I wanted to thank Mr. Adriance and you, Mr. Shibley, on trying to sort out my dehooking issue. Looks like you guys might be on to something. It may take a while for that to get cleared up, but we're going to have to figure that out same time that we develop our state-based red snapper regulations. But I wanted to thank you guys and Assistant Secretary Banks for looking into that. I think that the feds may be trying to clear some of that up. so folks, we can make it easier for folks to comply with those regs. But mainly, thank you guys for what you do, looking out for recreational anglers.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corville. Mr. Banks?
I just want to make a quick point on the potential regulation from the commission on descending devices. I just want to caution you a little bit in this regard. There's a large effort by the feds and the Gulf Council in general to obtain some NRDA funding, some NRD funding to help anglers throughout the Gulf obtain this descending devices and things like that. So the problem though is NRDA cannot provide such a funding stream for in order to address a regulation that's in place. So it could jeopardize our ability to get that funding to provide those devices. Now that may not be a big deal to you guys. We may feel like our anglers are just fine with buying their own descending devices, and I can appreciate that. But there is that little wrinkle when you start putting a regulation in place. It may impact that overall Gulf-wide effort to get the funding to provide those devices to our anglers. So just wanted to caution you in that regard.
Thank you,
Commissioner
Assistant
Corvo?
Secretary Banks. If you're asking, or I don't guess anybody's asking, but I'll give it. My position would be to make it sort of voluntary, not required.
Okay.
That would, but I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else. I'm just talking on, that would be my thought, just to further the outreach effort. But there may be some other folks who think it needs to be mandatory. I'm just only on my behalf, voluntary and really encouraging folks. I guess I would like to know though, if we as a group decide to make it voluntary and put it in our regs as voluntary, does that somehow mess that up?
No, I think that would be just fine.
Okay.
It's a mandatory regulation that they won't provide funding to help people meet.
But-
So a voluntary, as I appreciate it, would be just fine.
But again, that's my personal view, I'm not saying what anybody else might want to think or say or do, but I like the idea of it being voluntary or at least encouraged.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Hearing none, thank you very much, Chris.
You're welcome.
Moving on to item 13, to receive and consider a notice of intent to restrict all oyster harvesting on 4 artificial reefs. Ms. Ashley Ferguson.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Ashley Ferguson, and I'm the inshore artificial reef biologist for the department. I'm presenting today a notice of intent to restrict oyster harvest on 4 newly created artificial reefs. So to give a little bit of background, in 2015, the commission adopted a rule to designate and set aside 31 artificial reef sites, as well as protect them from oyster harvest. In 2017, this rule was amended to remove 3 reefs and add 3 newly constructed reefs. There was no public comment or correspondence that was received when the rule was originally proposed or when it was amended. Today, we're asking to include 4 newly created sites that you can see on the map. This would also restrict these reefs to oyster harvest. So each reef site is 10 acres. The material that's going to be placed in each of these sites takes up about 1 acre each. These reefs will enhance fishing opportunities for recreational anglers, and they will also serve as broodstock reefs. Each of these reefs have been marked with a 4-foot tall yellow buoy that's lighted in the center point of each artificial reef site. And these buoys were installed October 16th, about 2.5 weeks prior to any material going in the water. And that is it. So any questions?
I have one. You said that there was 15 artificial reefs, and that was set in 2015?
We had 31 that were originally
excuse
set
me.
aside. That's okay.
31. And how many have been put in place since 2015?
Since 2015, we had, the only change to the rule was that 3 were removed. It was Oyster Reef 1, 2, and 3. And then we had 3 that were added, which was East Calcasieu, West End, and St. John. So that left us at, I think we were at 29, which is what we're at now, 29.
Okay, so-
We're currently at 29.
But they're not all built yet, all
The
of these
4
artificial reefs.
They are already, all 29 are already built. The 4 artificial reef sites that we're talking about today that are up on the map, those are currently, as we speak, being built.
Okay, so these are the last of that group that were noticed in 2015 that are being built.
So in 2015, the original rule was to, all the reefs that were already in place, the rule was to designate and set aside those reefs that were already built to make them recreational artificial reef sites, and then in addition to restrict them from oyster harvest. And so that was to bless all of those reefs that were already created.
Okay.
Today, this rule is just this is an amendment to that rule to just now bless and protect and set aside these 4 reefs that are now artificial reefs within the inshore artificial reef program. But this would protect these 4 reefs from future
Okay.
oyster harvest.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Commissioner Samony?
Okay, is there anything that in here that stops it from being expanded upon? Right now, it's set at 5 acres. I wouldn't want it to get much bigger than that, you know?
The permit areas, each one of those areas are 10 acres, and right
10
now
acres.
the material is just taking up 1 acre. But no, there's nothing that protects it from within that 10 acre site. There's nothing that's, we can put more material according, at least as far as our permit goes. We
Okay,
are
well,
able
I'm
to
talking about
place.
the 10-acre site. Is there any language in there that stops it from being any more than that we take away from the oyster fishermen?
No, sir. There's nothing in this particular notice of intent?
Yes.
Do you mean? No, sir.
Well, maybe it should be.
Mr. Banks, do you know how many acres are in this square that y'all have here written?
Yeah,
You know, in that square
lake-
right there, these are 1 acre of actual material and 10 acres set aside as sanctuary. How many, so you're talking about 40 acres. How many acres are in that square?
Well, I don't know about in that square, but in the Lake Moore, Mississippi Sound area, we've got about 350,000 acres.
Okay.
Public oyster water bottoms.
Mhm.
And so this is going to be less than 1/100 of 1% of the
I
water
understand
bottoms.
it's a minute amount. I just the question,
Yeah.
once you open it up, how much more are they gonna take away from the
Well-
fishing? Usually when they take something away, you never get it back.
Well, you're right. And I will say that in this case, these are going to be very good reefs for recreational fishermen to go out and fish, but they're going to serve a very valuable purpose for the public oyster seed grounds.
Right.
The oysters, these are specifically being placed in areas where oysters can grow and survive. And so in addition to serving as very good recreational reefs, they're going to serve effectively as oyster broodstock to help continue that supply
Absolutely.
of larvae to the public grounds. I will say this, Commissioner Simony, it is not my intention to expand the footprint of these, but you're exactly right. There is nothing within this rule that prohibits the expansion in the future, but it is not my intention to expand these particular ones. Now, it certainly is our hope that we can build more of these around the coast, because I think they serve great use to the recreational community as well as the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I'm just worried that it just doesn't get out of hand. This is just a very small amount. I think it's a good thing. It's gonna make a lot of spats, people won't be able to actually go take the oysters out, be constantly making spats whenever it's that time. I'm just concerned that it gets out of hand. The footprint grows, a lot larger.
Thank you, Commissioner Sammy. Under this notice of intent, it is 10-acre sites. I think that they'd have to come back to this commission to expand. Wouldn't you have to, Ashley?
The process to either expand this site or to create a new artificial reef is we first bring it to the Artificial Reef Council. And typically they recommend either before seeing them, we try to go visit the crab task force and the shrimp task force and try to get comment. And then we later go to, then we later would bring it to be blessed and put under this rule for the restriction on oyster harvest. So it would go through a couple of steps before it would be expanded or there would be an additional reef or anything
Yeah,
like
so
that.
there would be a new request. There would be a new notice of intent. It would go through the Artificial Reef Council, probably the Oyster Task Force, because I remember sitting in an Oyster Task Force meeting probably about a year, at least a year ago, if not a year and a half. And I think it was initially going to be reef balls that was going to be placed from the minutes I read. This is not reef balls.
It is reef balls.
Is it?
It's going to be limestone reef balls and oyster shell.
Is it going to be a literal ball?
I have some pictures.
Oh, that would be great to see what they're going to actually look like.
So this is all of the material. So at the 4 different sites, we have the Lakeborn site that is going to be created over an existing shell pad that was remnants of oil and gas companies, the structure has since been long removed, but there's still that shell pad down in Lakeborn. So there are only going to be 40 reef balls added to that particular site. The Grand Banks, Cabbage, and West Caraca reefs are each going to get 30 reef balls, about 290 tons of limestone, and 30 cubic yards of oyster shell. So since I made this slide, they actually reduced the amount of limestone at West Caraca. That's a smaller site. And there's some adjustment there. That's not the 290 tons. It's not going to perfectly be distributed evenly between those 3 sites, the limestone. But approximately it's going to be about, we would say 200 tons each per site.
Okay, do you have any idea in these particular locations, what the water level is that they're going to be in, the depth?
The depths definitely vary at all of the sites, but in the artificial reef program, in the inshore program, we are required to have at least 6 feet of clearance above all of our material. So that requirement will be met. That's a Coast Guard requirement. The Coast Guard has looked at all of these sites and their locations, and based on their locations, they did recommend that we put buoys in the center of each reef and what type of buoy. So we made sure that those buoys were out long before the material was out, to just give a heads up that was going there, as well as a broadcast notice to mariners and things like that. So.
I'm sorry to be doing this as chairman. This has not been usually what I do, but since I'm in the oyster business, that has to do with oysters. I felt it necessary to at least bring those sorts of questions up. And, 6 feet of clearance in this is good. I think the brood stock portion of this is good. We need to have areas that can be in the water column, that there won't be hypoxia issues that can be caused, and hopefully these can bring more spat in the water that can enhance all those public grounds in the Mississippi Sound. And thank you. I'm sorry, because I normally don't. As chairman, I've chosen not to be very vocal. This is probably the most vocal I've been on any issue since I've been chair. With that, any other questions from anyone? No questions from the commission. We do have one comment card. And it's from Miss Taylor. I thought that's Nakan. I'm sorry. Please come up to the microphone, Miss Nakan, and state your name and address.
It's Taylor Knockin, Montague, 1341 Highway 55, Montague. I just have a question that in the future, are y'all thinking about putting any artificial reefs in Terrebonne or anywhere lower? Or do y'all have any already?
At this time, I'm not really sure. Right now, thank you. We at this time, these 4 artificial reefs as of this year, this is what we have in our plan, as well as enhancing several artificial reefs that are across the entire coast. So as far as broodstock style reefs, we may have those coming in the future, and we'll talk about it. I'll leave it up to the oyster program as far as whether something is suitable for oyster habitat. I just help facilitate the process of the
Thank
reef
you very
building.
much, Ashley.
You're welcome.
Well, Commissioner Corville.
Mr. Chairman, when appropriate, I'd like to move favor.
The time is now. I have a motion by Commissioner Corville, a second by Commissioner Salmony. Hearing no objection, all in favor, say aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. With that, the next meeting in March, what is the commission members' pleasure?
I'd make a motion for the 5th.
The 5th of March, which is, excuse me, and where?
I would think here, but General Counsel Garrett, wouldn't that be when we're starting the final stages of the NOI for hunting regulations?
That's what my understanding, I think it's important.
So we should probably have it here, because I think the month prior will be in Alexandria, given those folks, Ruston, but northern parishes, giving those folks an opportunity to not have to travel so far and provide comment during that same time period. So my motion would be 9:30 here on the 5th.
Without objection, we'll have this in Baton Rouge, March 7th, March 5th at 9:30 a.m.
I think Commissioner Sammy's got a couple of comments that he might want to, he was suggesting Toledo Bend, which I'm in favor of too, pretty strong, but I'll back off.
Let's go.
Okay, maybe the next, and hearing no objections, we're gonna do it in Baton Rouge on the 5th of March, 9:30 a.m. Thank you. Any public comments? Commissioner Corville?
I'd like to request an agenda item for the December agenda. Based on a call I was on earlier this morning for this commission to send a letter to Director Angel with Bessie regarding the rate of platforms being removed from the Gulf. I think, if I'm not mistaken, some department staff was on that same call. But I think, when you guys solicit the agenda items, hopefully there'll be a few more details. Perhaps the department staff can help us with the details of that. But I think it would, I'd just like to get that sort of on record that I would like to see that as an agenda item for the December meeting with more details to come.
Okay, if you have any particular details, I just suggest that you get with the department on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that they can go ahead. Mr. Banks?
You covered it, I was just gonna.
Absolutely.
Because I don't know anything about that call. I don't think that any of our staff, if it had to do with artificial reefs, I don't think we were invited. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Corville. Go ahead and get some information to the department on that, and they can work on the agenda item for next month. Hearing no other and seeing no other public comments on the table, a motion to adjourn? A motion to adjourn. Thank you very much.